Okay, so, we're talking about cases that they just stick with you. And for me, like one of the absolute titans of true crime, one that has just captivated so many people for so long, has gotta be the Black Dahlia. It's just one of those names, right? It conjures up so much, like old Hollywood mystery, grim fascination. We're going back to 1947, Los Angeles, a time when Hollywood was really, it was just starting to solidify its legendary status, but also had this super dark underbelly. And then this case happens. Elizabeth Short, only 22 years old, her murder, still unsolved, is like truly one of the most famous and like oldest cold cases in U.S. history. It's wild. The public, they've been obsessed with it for decades, just decades, and for good reason.
Right, totally. It's one of those where you hear the name and you immediately know something terrible happened. But beyond the name, I don't know much about Elizabeth Short herself. What was her story before all this?
Yeah, exactly. That's where it really gets interesting and actually kind of sad, because so much of her identity gets wrapped up in this posthumous nickname, right? But Elizabeth Short, or as her friends and family knew her, Betty or Beth, she was born in 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts. And she actually spent her early life in New England and Florida before moving to California. Her father lived out there, so she was there. While she's often portrayed as this aspiring actress chasing stardom, the truth is a little more, well, grounded. She actually had no known acting credits, or even really any jobs, in Los Angeles itself. So that whole narrative, it's a bit of a media invention, to be honest. The Black Dahlia nickname itself, it came from newspapers. They think it originated from the 1946 film noir thriller, The Blue Dahlia, and probably also, referencing her dark hair and her preference for black clothing. Pretty evocative, if you ask me. So, yeah, her life before the tragedy, it's often overshadowed, which is a real shame. She was just a young woman, really, trying to find her way. Interestingly, her fingerprints were actually on file with the FBI, not for anything nefarious, but because of a 1943 arrest for underage drinking in Santa Barbara. So, when her body was found, they were able to identify her incredibly quickly, which is kind of a detail that often gets overlooked in the sensationalism. It wasn't just some, unknown Jane Doe for long. And that brings us to the crime itself, which is it's brutal. It's honestly one of the most gruesome murders you could ever imagine. Just absolutely horrific. And that's really where the true public fascination, I think, really takes hold.
Wow, I didn't know about the FBI thing. That's a fascinating detail. So, okay, the crime itself then. I've heard bits and pieces, but it's always kind of hinted at. What exactly, what happened when she was found?
All right, so get this. On January 15th, 1947, in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, a woman was walking with her daughter, just, doing their thing. And they discovered Elizabeth Short's body in a vacant lot. And when I say discovered, I mean it was almost beyond recognition. Her body was completely naked, severely mutilated. And here's the kicker. It was severed right at the waist, just completely cut in half. And it was drained of blood, which is just horrifying to even think about. It was also arranged in this sexually suggestive pose. Medical examiners, they determined her death had occurred about 10 to 12 hours before discovery. So that puts it on the evening of January 14th or the early morning of the 15th. But the really chilling part is that the killer had washed the body thoroughly, leaving no blood at the scene, which immediately told investigators, okay, this didn't happen here. It happened somewhere else. Just totally premeditated, And the mutilations, oh my God. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth all the way to her ears, creating what's known as a Glasgow smile. It's just a truly grotesque detail. And portions of flesh had actually been cut from her thighs and her breasts. An autopsy concluded the cause of death was cerebral hemorrhage and shock, but there was also evidence that suggested she had been bound and tortured before she died. Just absolutely horrifying. And that level of violence, that level of precision in the mutilation, it just screams something else, doesn't it? It's not just some random act, It's something really, really specific. And that's what really, like, kicked off one of the biggest investigations at the time. A Glasgow smile. That's just chilling. And the fact that the body was cleaned and, like, arranged, it implies such intent. It's not just a crime of passion, it's something cold and calculated. How on earth did the police even begin to investigate something like that with so little direct evidence at the scene? Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, right? The LAPD, they launched this massive investigation, like it was the largest since the 1927 Marion Parker murder, with hundreds of officers involved. The FBI even assisted, which was kind of a big deal back then. They identified Short's body within 56 minutes, actually, using something called sound photo, which was like a primitive fax machine, to send her fingerprints. But despite all that intense scrutiny and like tons of leads, the case was just so challenging because there was this crazy lack of physical evidence. The killer had meticulously cleaned the crime scene, remember? Like absolutely spotless where the body was dumped. The surgical precision of the mutilations, though, that led investigators to suspect someone with medical knowledge. They looked at over 150 suspects, and, like many false confessions were reported, which just totally complicated things even further. You've got people trying to take credit for this horrific thing. It's just awful. So the investigation is just like swirling with all this activity, but no real breakthroughs. It's a total mess. And then, about a week and a half later, on January 24th, 1947, something else happens that just amps up the whole macabre nature of this case. A manila envelope, addressed to Los Angeles newspapers, it was intercepted. And what was inside? Oh man, it contained Short's personal papers, like her birth certificate, business cards, an address book, and then, like, also this note composed of cutout newspaper headlines. It was just so eerie. But here's the really creepy part. The contents, they had been cleaned with gasoline, just like her body had been. So authorities were pretty sure, like almost immediately, this was from the killer. It was a direct taunt, a message. And fingerprints were actually found on an anonymous letter, possibly also sent by the killer, but those fingerprints didn't match anyone in the FBI files. So again, like a dead end. It's so frustrating, even looking back at it now.
Oh, that's incredibly disturbing. A gasoline-cleaned letter? That's such a specific, almost theatrical touch. It feels like the killer was playing a game with the police and the media. So, with all that going on and all these false confessions, who were the main suspects that investigators actually focused on? Like, who really stood out?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a sick, twisted game. And over the years, tons of individuals have been proposed as Short's killer, but none have ever been conclusively proven. But some names just really keep coming up. First off, you've got Robert "Red" Manley. He was a salesman and actually the last known person to see Short alive. He was briefly arrested, but then, he was released. Then there's Dr. George Hodel. He was a prominent Los Angeles physician, and he became a really compelling suspect, mostly because of his medical knowledge, right? Like that whole surgical precision thing. And his son, Steve Hodel, who was actually a retired LAPD detective, he's like very publicly presented evidence implicating his own father. It's a whole family saga. Wiretaps on George Hodel's home back in 1949 reportedly captured conversations where he, like seemingly alluded to the crime. But the LAP, they just didn't feel they had enough evidence for an arrest. That's pretty wild stuff. And it doesn't stop there, right? Like, the list of suspects and theories is just extensive. You also have Leslie Dillon, who was a bellhop and a writer. He became a person of interest partly because of his knowledge of crime details, and a connection to a man named Mark Hansen, who actually knew Short. Then there's Norman Chandler, who was the publisher of the Los Angeles Times. He was actually named as a suspect in a 2005 book by Donald Wolfe. That theory alleged that he impregnated Short and then had her murdered by Bugsy Siegel, which, like, takes it into this whole organized crime, Hollywood underworld kind of thing, you know? Bugsy Siegel himself, the notorious LA mobster, he was also a suspect in some theories, often linked to Chandler's alleged involvement. It's like a who's who of, like, potentially shady characters from that era. And, like, you've even got George Knowlton. His daughter, Janice Knowlton, actually claimed in a 1995 book that she witnessed her father kill Short, which, talk about a bombshell, you know? Just absolutely shocking to hear that from a family member.
Oh my gosh, so many different directions. From a physician to a mobster to a newspaper publisher and even a family member like accusing their own father. That's an intense level of complication for investigators. It sounds like there's no shortage of theories or potential culprits. Were there any connections to other cases or other unsolved murders that came up?
Absolutely. Like, so many attempted connections. Walter Bailey, a surgeon, was also proposed by researcher Larry Harnish because he had a connection to the area where the body was found and, obviously possessed the surgical skills that were evident in the crime. So that's another, like, medically inclined suspect. And yes, links have absolutely been suggested to other unsolved murders. Like the Cleveland torso murders, which are just equally horrific. The 1946 murder of Suzanne Degnan in Chicago, also known as the Lipstick Murders, which is another really, really interesting case. And the murders of Ora Elizabeth Murray and Georgette Bauerdorf in Los Angeles. However, like the connections to the Cleveland torso murders, they were actually discounted by the original LAPD investigators. So it's not just a free-for-all of serial killers necessarily. But the media, oh man, the Black Dahlia murder became this absolute sensation. Newspapers were just like heavily covering the story. And sometimes they'd even reprint these sensationalized false reports about Short's torture. It was just like a feeding frenzy. And the case's gruesome nature, obviously, and its totally unsolved status have led to this enduring fascination. It's made it this super prominent subject in popular culture. Wow. So it's not just a true crime story, it's become this cultural touchstone, too. I mean, it's pretty clear why. It's got all the elements: mystery, Hollywood, gruesome details, and no answers. It just keeps people guessing, you know? Oh, absolutely. Like, it's inspired numerous books, both fiction and nonfiction. James Ellroy's 1987 novel, The Black Dahlia, that one's huge, you know? It was even adapted into a 2006 film directed by Brian De Palma. So it's gone from a real-life horror to like a cinematic universe, basically. The story just continues to generate new true crime investigations, new fictionalized retellings, and just like endless public speculation. It truly reflects its status as this compelling and just incredibly tragic mystery. It's one of those cases like it just won't let go, you know? It's stuck in time. And I think that's why it'll always be just one of the most talked about unsolved crimes, period. Just truly fascinating, but just so sad. So sad for Elizabeth Short.